Hey guys, tonight we're talking about how one man turned massive debt into the most profitable genocide in ancient history. Julius Caesar owed the modern equivalent of $300 million in 58 BC. His creditors were circling like sharks. Bankruptcy in Rome meant political death, exile or assassination by the men you'd borrowed from. So Caesar did what any rational sociopath would do. He invaded a country that hadn't attacked Rome, killed 1 million people, enslaved another 1 million, and called it self-defense. The Roman Senate gave him a triumph. History called him a genius. The Gauls called it extermination. Dear viewers, our big goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers on this channel, and with your support we can achieve it. Only on our channel will you find such interesting and unique stories about wars from ancient times. Subscribe so you don't miss them. We're sincerely grateful to everyone who helps us achieve this goal. Also, write in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious to see people from all over the world brought together by a single story. And now, let's move on to today's story. You're 41 years old in the spring of 58 BC. You've never questioned that the gods speak through bird flights and animal entrails. You've never seen a map of the world beyond tribal territories your grandfather walked. You know the Romans exist the way you know wolves exist. Dangerous when hungry, best avoided. Your people, the Helvetii, have decided something unprecedented. The entire tribe will abandon its homeland in what Romans call Helvetia and migrate west into central Gaul. Every man, woman, child, wagon, cow, and cooking pot. 368,000 people burning their towns behind them so no one turns back. The smoke smells wrong that morning. Not wood smoke. Thatch and grain stores and the wattle and daub homes your family built over generations, all burning at once. The smoke carries the smell of rendered fat from livestock your neighbours are slaughtering because they can't bring whole herds. Your hands shake as you load the wagon, not from cold but from understanding there's no return. The carved oak corner post of your house, the one your father notched to mark your height each year, collapses into ash. That post was older than Rome's republic. You're wearing every piece of clothing you own, 2 tunics, a wool cloak, leather shoes wrapped in rags for the journey. Your sword, inherited from your grandfather, hangs heavy at your side. The iron blade shows hammer marks from the smith who forged it, each imperfection familiar as a scar on your own hand. The migration starts in March. 368,000 Helvetii, their wagons stretching beyond sight, crawling westward like a nation-sized centipede. The tribal elders negotiate with the Aedui for passage through their territory into fertile lands near the Santones. Everything is arranged. Everything is legal by the customs of Gaul. Caesar watches from across the border and sees opportunity dripping with gold. He's waiting in Geneva with a single legion when the Helvetii arrive requesting passage through Roman-controlled territory. Caesar tells them to return in 2 weeks for his decision. They agree, professional, diplomatic. During those 2 weeks, Caesar's soldiers build a wall, 19 miles of fortification, 8 feet high, backed by a trench, studded with watchtowers. The construction consumes trees by the thousand. His legionaries work in shifts, never sleeping, because this wall isn't defence, it's theatre. When the Helvetii return, Caesar gestures at his instant fortress and denies passage. The message is clear. Rome's military can reshape geography in days. The Helvetii turn north instead, negotiating passage through Sequani territory. Caesar follows. He claims he's protecting Roman allies. He's lying. The Aedui, Rome's supposed friends, sent messengers to Caesar begging for help against the Helvetii migration. Caesar paid those messengers. The Aedui leaders who signed the requests were in debt to Roman moneylenders. Scripted crisis, manufactured threat. Caesar needed war because war meant plunder, and plunder meant surviving another year ahead of his creditors. His 4 legions shadow the Helvetii migration for weeks. 24,000 Roman soldiers, each man drilled until formations became reflex. They march in column, shields on backs, javelins in hand, transforming from marching order to battle formation in minutes. The Helvetii keep moving, burdened by families and wagons averaging 12 miles per day. Caesar's legions, unburdened, cover 25. Cavalry scouts report every Helvetii campsite to Caesar's intelligence officers, who map the migration's route with geometric precision. Discipline separates Roman soldiers from tribal warriors like species boundaries separate wolves from dogs. Every legionary owns his equipment: bronze helmet, chainmail shirt if wealthy or layered linen if poor, curved rectangular shield, 2 javelins, short sword, dagger. They purchase these items from their pay or inherit them. A soldier who loses his shield faces beatings from his tent mates. 8 men share a tent, share rations, share the shame if one fails. Centurions carry vine-wood staffs for beating subordinates. Decimation, executing every 10th man in a unit that broke in battle, remains legal punishment. Soldiers fear their officers more than enemy warriors. Training consumes Roman military life like religion consumes druids. Wooden swords, double weight, wicker shields, heavier than combat versions. 6 hours daily of sword drills, javelin throws, formation marching, ditch digging, wall building. A legion could fortify a camp for 5,000 men in 4 hours, complete with ramparts, gates, and towers. Every camp, identical layout. A soldier transferred from Hispania to Gaul could find the latrines in darkness. This standardization meant Roman armies carried their fortresses with them, sleeping behind walls every night while enemies slept under stars. The Helvetii crossed the Seine River in early June. The crossing takes 3 days. Hundreds of rafts, thousands of wagons, families herding livestock through shallows. The Tigerini tribe, 30,000 people, camps on the eastern bank while the rest cross. Caesar receives this intelligence at dawn. By noon, his legions are marching. By nightfall, they hit the Tigerini camp like an avalanche. Slaughter, not battle. Warriors half-dressed, scrambling for weapons, women running with children. The Roman formation advances shield to shield, a wall of bronze and iron, javelins launched in volleys that punch through bodies and pin victims to the ground. Soldiers step over the dying without breaking stride. The short Roman gladius, designed for stabbing in close formation, finds kidneys and throats with industrial efficiency. Screaming lasts maybe an hour. The Tigerini cease to exist as a tribe. Survivors scattered into forests, bodies floating downriver for days. Caesar's engineers build a bridge across the Saône in 1 day. Wooden pilings, pre-measured planks, coordinated construction teams. The Helvetii migration, seeing this impossible speed, understands too late what hunts them. They send diplomats. Divico, an old chief who defeated Romans decades earlier, offers terms. The Helvetii will settle wherever Rome permits, will accept reasonable conditions, will become Roman allies. Caesar demands hostages and unconditional surrender. Divico refuses. Romans don't negotiate, he realizes. They dictate. 2 weeks of pursuit. The Helvetii are starving now. Their grain supplies, calculated for a peaceful migration, don't account for constant forced marches fleeing an army. Children weak from hunger, elderly dying beside the road. Warriors look back at the dust cloud marking Roman advance and know fighting is inevitable. The migration wheels to face its hunter near Bibracte, largest town of the Aedui. Caesar positions his 4 veteran legions on a hillside. The 2 newest legions guard the baggage train behind the hill. 24,000 Romans facing 80,000 Helvetii warriors, plus 200,000 plus civilians clustered behind their battle line. The Helvetii form a phalanx, shields overlapped, spears forward, mass and momentum their advantage. They charge uphill. The Romans wait. Discipline holds. First rank kneels, shields braced, second rank stands, javelins ready. At 30 yards the command sounds. Javelins arc, not thrown randomly but in coordinated volleys that blacken the sky. 7 feet long iron shank designed to bend on impact. They puncture shields, weight dragging them down, making the shields unusable. Warriors drop their shields or die trying to fight burdened. The Helvetii charge fragments into individual combats. Roman swords do their work. The gladius, 18 inches of steel, thrives in tight quarters. Stab to the gut. Withdraw. Next target. Shield boss to the face. Stab to the throat. Withdraw. Centurions bark cadence. Formations adjust, flowing around obstacles, encircling resistance points. The Helvetii bravery means nothing against this machine. An individual warrior might equal or surpass an individual legionary in skill. 1,000 warriors cannot match a cohort of 480 men who fight as a single organism. The Helvetii line breaks. Warriors retreat toward their wagons where families wait. Caesar's cavalry, mostly Gallic auxiliaries hungry for plunder, circles the flanks. The battle becomes a massacre, becomes a siege. Helvetii warriors form wagon circles defending families with their bodies. Romans set wagons aflame, smoke and screaming and the sick crunch of shields breaking bones. Fighting continues into darkness. Torches illuminate scenes from nightmares. A Helvetii mother stabbing a legionary with a cooking knife. A Roman soldier dragging a girl by her hair toward the slave pens already being erected. Old men dying on swords, young men dying on javelins, children trampled in the chaos. By dawn, the Helvetii nation is finished. Caesar's own account lists 368,000 Helvetii at the migration start. After bivouacked, 110,000 survived to surrender. Do the arithmetic. 250,000 dead or scattered or enslaved in a single campaign. Caesar orders a census of survivors, recorded on captured Helvetii documents written in Greek letters. He returns them to their burned homeland. Not mercy. Depopulated territory serves no purpose. Better to have a grateful, weakened tribe as a buffer against Germanic raiders than empty land inviting invasion. The plunder staggers imagination. Every Helvetii wagon contained family wealth, gold torques, silver bracelets, bronze pots, iron tools, grain stores, livestock. Roman soldiers collect it systematically, unit by unit, piling treasure in camps while officers inventory every item. 1/10 goes to the state treasury, 1/10 to Caesar personally, the rest divided by rank and service length. A common legionary might receive 2 years' pay from a single battle, a centurion 10 years' pay. This mathematics explains Roman military expansion better than any propaganda about civilization. Slaves fetch prices based on age, strength, beauty, skills. Women of childbearing age, premium value. Children over 10, moderate value. Elderly or injured, minimal value or killed to avoid feeding. The slave markets in Rome, already glutted with captives from Eastern wars, absorb another 100,000 Gauls. Prices crash. Families purchase Gallic slaves as casually as buying pottery. Caesar emerges from the Helvetii campaign wealthy enough to postpone creditors and powerful enough to demand more. He's governor of 3 provinces for 5 years by Senate decree. Cisalpine Gaul, Illyricum, and Transalpine Gaul, the last barely under Roman control, a narrow strip along the Mediterranean coast. Everything north of that strip, all of Gaul proper, remains independent. Hundreds of tribes, millions of people, vast forests and rivers and gold deposits. Caesar looks north and sees 8 more years of opportunity. His legions dig in for the summer near modern Besançon. Soldiers grumble about extended deployment. They expect to return to Italy, collect their plunder, retire to farms. Caesar announces the army is staying in Gaul. New threat emerging. Germanic tribes crossing the Rhine, endangering Roman allies. Soldiers stare at him with dawning understanding. One campaign just became permanent occupation. Word spreads across Gaul with the speed of rumour. A Roman army, 4 legions, 24,000 men, remains north of the province, not withdrawing, building permanent camps. Caesar dispatches messengers to tribal councils claiming protection and friendship. Gallic chiefs who fought each other for generations suddenly share information. The Romans aren't leaving. The Romans are never leaving. The massacred Helvetii serve as lesson and warning. Caesar spends the summer interviewing Gallic informants, mapping tribal territories, identifying rivalries and alliances. His intelligence network grows like fungus. Tribal warriors visiting Roman camps, trading information for silver. Merchants who travel between tribes, reporting to Caesar's officers. Druids who walk freely across boundaries, memorizing troop strengths and political disputes. Caesar learns which chiefs hate their neighbours more than they'll hate Rome. Those chiefs become allies, the rest become targets. By autumn, Caesar identifies his next enemy, Ariovistus, Germanic king who already conquered eastern Gaul with 120,000 warriors. The Aeduan Sequani, desperate to stop Ariovistus, invited him as mercenary years ago. He defeated their enemies, then demanded land, hostages, tribute. Now Germanic settlers farm Gallic fields while Gallic chiefs pay protection money. Ariovistus calls himself king. Caesar calls him an opportunity. The mathematics are perfect. Defeat Ariovistus, and Caesar becomes saviour of Gaul. The grateful tribes will supply grain, soldiers, information. Their gold will pay legionaries. Their intertribal feuds will prevent unified resistance against Rome. Caesar can spend years protecting Gaul while actually conquering it piece by piece, always claiming defensive war. The Helvetii campaign proved Romans can exterminate entire peoples without consequences. Ariovistus will prove they can do it again. Caesar sends ambassadors to Ariovistus demanding he stop crossing the Rhine, stop taking hostages, stop attacking Rome's Gallic allies. Ariovistus sends back a message dripping with contempt. He conquered Gaul by right of war. Romans conquered their territory the same way, stay south of the Sequani lands or test Germanic steel. The ambassadors report Ariovistus seemed genuinely confused why Romans cared about Gallic tribal politics. Caesar reads the message to his officers. They smile. Ariovistus just provided perfect justification for war. A Germanic king threatening Roman ambassadors, oppressing Roman allies, destabilizing regions bordering Roman territory. The Senate will approve enthusiastically. More importantly, Roman soldiers will fight enthusiastically, because Germanic tribes have reputation for ferocity that makes Gallic warriors seem civilized. Defeating Germans means glory, plunder, and proof that Roman civilization conquers barbarian chaos. September arrives. Caesar's 4 legions march northeast toward Germanic-occupied territories. Soldiers sharpen swords and whisper about berserkers who feel no pain, about Germanic women who fight beside men, about tribes that sacrifice prisoners to war gods by the hundreds. Fear and anticipation taste identical. The legions march in perfect formation, sandals pounding roads with metronomic precision, heading toward collision with an enemy that doesn't understand retreat. Ariovistus commanded 120,000 Germanic warriors, who believed dying in battle guaranteed paradise while dying in bed guaranteed shame. His people had been crossing the Rhine for 15 years, not as raiders, but as conquerors establishing permanent settlements. The Swabi tribe alone fielded 100,000 fighters from a total population exceeding 500,000. They practiced warfare like Romans practiced engineering, systematic, generational, culturally embedded. Germanic boys received shields at age 15. Cowards were drowned in bogs, their bodies weighted with stones as warnings. The Gallic tribes of eastern territories lived in absolute terror. The Sequani had invited Ariovistus as a mercenary against the Aedui, promising land for his services. He defeated the Aedui, then demanded 1/3 of Sequani territory. When granted that, he demanded another third. Germanic settlers displaced Gallic farmers who'd worked the same fields for centuries. Tribal nobles sent sons and daughters as hostages to guarantee submission. Ariovistus held them in camps guarded by warriors who viewed hostage-taking as sacred trust. Break your word and the hostages died screaming. Caesar's intelligence officers interviewed Gallic refugees fleeing Germanic occupation. The stories matched with disturbing consistency. Germanic women fought alongside men, wielding spears and axes with equal brutality. Tribes consulted priestesses who read futures in flowing water and predicted victory or defeat with uncanny accuracy. Warriors worked themselves into battle frenzy through rhythmic chanting and fermented drinks, emerging psychologically transformed into creatures that charged shield walls without hesitation. Captured enemies faced sacrifice, throats cut over sacred groves, bodies hung from trees as offerings to Woden. The Roman legions marched through territories already conquered by Ariovistus, burned Gallic villages, abandoned farms, roads empty of travellers. Sequani chiefs arrived at Caesar's camp nightly, whispering intelligence about Germanic positions and troop movements. Their desperation stank like gangrene. These same chiefs had invited Ariovistus, had allied with him against rival tribes, had celebrated when Germanic warriors slaughtered their Aedui enemies. Now they begged Rome to save them from the monster they'd imported. Caesar accepted their intelligence, promised protection, and planned how to profit from both sides' destruction. Ariovistus agreed to a meeting. Neutral ground, limited escorts, diplomatic protocol. Caesar arrived with cavalry bodyguards. Ariovistus appeared with thousands of mounted warriors circling the meeting site in deliberate intimidation. The Germanic king sat his horse like he'd been born there. Tall, scarred, wearing Roman armour stripped from corpses of legionaries killed decades earlier in Germanic ambushes. He spoke Latin with gutter accent learned from prisoners. The negotiation collapsed within minutes. Ariovistus demanded to know why Romans interfered in Gallic affairs. He'd conquered fairly by Germanic law, in response to Gallic invitation. Caesar claimed authority based on treaties with the Aedui and Sequani. Ariovistus laughed. Those same tribes had hired him to fight each other. Both men understood the meeting was theatre. War had been decided before they met. The conversation existed so historians could record that diplomacy was attempted. Caesar returned to his camp and found chaos. A rumour had spread through the legions like plague. Germanic warriors were unbeatable. Their priestesses had prophesied Roman defeat. Entire legions that faced Germans in previous wars had been annihilated. Soldiers gathered in tents, writing wills, praying to household gods. Centurions couldn't restore order because they shared the fear. The Syrian and Spanish provinces bred tough soldiers, but they'd never faced Germans. These warriors had destroyed the Cimbri and Teutones who'd terrorized Rome a generation earlier, armies so fierce that Roman mothers scared children with their names. The 10th Legion, Caesar's favourite, requested private audience. Their officers explained that soldiers were prepared to fight, but fighting Germans meant certain death. perhaps withdrawal to prepared positions or waiting for reinforcements or negotiating tribute payments. The request was mutiny polished with respectful language. Soldiers asking commanders to abandon campaign objectives didn't qualify as advice, it qualified as refusing orders. Caesar assembled all 6 legions. He'd recruited 2 new ones over the summer, bringing total strength to 30,000 men. They formed in perfect ranks, silent, waiting. Caesar's voice carried across the formation without shouting. He thanked the 10th Legion for their honesty. Since they were too frightened to fight, they could guard the baggage trains. He'd advance with the other 5 legions, the ones with courage. The 10th Legion's officers protested immediately. Guarding baggage was punishment duty assigned to cowards and criminals. Their honour was being destroyed in front of 24,000 witnesses. Caesar agreed. Cowardice did destroy honour. If they wished to restore it, they could march at the vanguard tomorrow, first into battle. The 10th Legion requested that privilege immediately, desperate to erase the stain. Every other legion watched this manipulation and understood. Caesar had transformed fear into competitive shame. Soldiers would die rather than appear cowardly to rival legions. The armies collided near modern Mulhouse in September. Ariovistus positioned his 7 tribal contingents by nation: Harudes, Marcomanni, Trebosi, Vangiones, Nemetes, Seduci, Suebi. Each tribe maintained separate identity, separate banners, separate war cries. Germanic women formed wagon circles behind the battle line, watching their men fight. Priestesses walked between the formations, chanting predictions and blessings. Warriors beat shields in rhythmic thunder that vibrated through earth. Caesar deployed his legions in triple line formation. 4 cohorts front, 3 middle, 3 rear. The 10th Legion held the right flank, position of honour and danger. Cavalry screened the flanks, mostly Gallic auxiliaries who hated Germans more than they distrusted Romans. Trumpets sounded. The legions advanced uphill toward Germanic positions at measured pace, shields locked, javelins ready. The Germanic charge came like avalanche. Warriors screaming, shields raised, spears levelled. They crashed into Roman lines with physical impact that drove formations backward. Individual Germans stood head and shoulders taller than Italian legionaries. Their shields, oval and wooden, covered torsos. Long spears outreached Roman javelins. They fought with abandon that defied tactical sense, leaping over fallen comrades, ignoring wounds, pressing forward until killed. The Roman left flank buckled. Germanic Suebi concentrated their best warriors there, sensing weakness. Cohorts fragmented into individual combats where Germanic size and reach advantages became lethal. Centurions fell, their vinewood staffs trampled into mud. Soldiers stumbled backward, shields splintered, formations dissolving. The entire left wing faced annihilation within minutes. Caesar personally led the 10th Legion into the collapsing flank. Officers on horseback, visible above combat, became targets. Germans hurled spears that killed Caesar's horse and wounded his bodyguards. He dismounted, grabbed a shield from a dead legionary and stepped into the front rank. Soldiers, seeing their commander fighting alongside them, stopped retreating. The 10th Legion's pride, already wounded by morning's shame, transformed into suicidal determination. They shoved forward shield to shield, creating pressure that halted Germanic momentum. The battle hinged on endurance. Germanic warriors fought with explosive intensity that couldn't be sustained. Romans fought with mechanical efficiency that operated indefinitely. Legionaries rotated. Front rank fought until exhausted, stepped back, fresh rank replaced them. Germans had no such system. Their best warriors stayed engaged until killed or victorious. As individuals, they were superior. As a system, they were doomed. The Germanic right flank broke first. Roman cavalry circling the battlefield found gaps between tribal contingents. Gallic horsemen, motivated by generations of hatred, charged those gaps. Germanic warriors turned to face new threats, breaking formation cohesion. The Roman centre, grinding forward like millstones, sensed weakness and accelerated. Centuries that had been absorbing Germanic pressure suddenly pushed back. Ariovistus watched his line collapse from horseback. He'd positioned himself with the Suebi, his most loyal tribe. They held firm while other contingents disintegrated. The Harudes fled first, running toward the wagon circles where their families waited. Roman cavalry cut them down from behind. The Tribossi followed, then the Vangiones. Each tribal retreat infected adjacent units. Within an hour, organised Germanic defence had transformed into mob fleeing toward the Rhine. The massacre extended for miles. Roman cavalry pursued Germanic warriors to the riverbank, men drowning trying to swim the Rhine in full armour, families caught in wagon circles watching fathers and sons die. Germanic women grabbed weapons and fought, delaying Romans long enough for some children to escape. The Suebi made final stand on a low hill, surrounded, refusing surrender. They died there, every warrior, fighting until Roman swords ended them. Ariovistus escaped across the Rhine on a small boat, one of the last to cross before Romans reached the bank. Both his wives, pregnant and heavy with travel, were captured trying to follow. One daughter died of exposure during the pursuit. Another was dragged from hiding beneath corpses. Caesar sent them all to slave markets in Rome with special notation: family of Germanic king, premium value for collectors, the battle's butcher's bill, 80,000 Germanic dead, scattered across miles of retreat. Roman casualties, 1,200 killed, 3,000 wounded. The mathematics of discipline versus courage. Caesar's legions had faced the terror that haunted Roman nightmares and had crushed it through superior organisation. Germanic survivors fled east across the Rhine, carrying stories about Roman formations that ground armies to paste. Caesar stationed legions along the Rhine's western bank. No more Germanic crossings. The river became border, enforced by patrols and fortified camps. Gallic tribes that had lived under Germanic occupation for years emerged from hiding, grateful and terrified. They understood what Roman protection meant. Trade Rome for Ariovistus, except Romans built roads and collected taxes and never left. The winter of 58 to 57 BC changed everything. Caesar should have returned to Cisalpine Gaul, the province he actually governed. Senate protocol demanded governors spend winter in their assigned territories. He ignored protocol. The legions constructed winter quarters in Gallic lands north of the province, building log fortresses that housed 5,000 men each. Soldiers who'd expected to return to Italy instead cut timber, dug latrines, and watched Gallic civilians with occupiers' eyes. Gallic chiefs convened secret councils in winter forests where Roman spies couldn't penetrate. The Helvetii had been destroyed. Ariovistus had been destroyed. Caesar commanded 6 legions permanently stationed in Gaul, building infrastructure, recruiting auxiliaries, mapping territories. Tribal leaders who'd welcomed Roman intervention against Germanic invaders now understood their mistake. Rome didn't come to help. Rome came to stay. The Belgae tribes of northern Gaul saw most clearly. They occupied territories from the Seine to the Rhine, fierce peoples who claimed Germanic ancestry and prided themselves on resisting Mediterranean civilization. Their warriors painted faces with woad, fought naked in summer to display scars, and measured manhood by enemies killed. They'd watched Caesar massacre the Helvetii and annihilate Ariovistus within a single campaign season. Simple arithmetic suggested Belgae territory was next. We hope you have already subscribed to our channel, and if not, please do so right now. Our goal is to reach our first 1,000 subscribers. This is very important to us. Only on our channel will you find such interesting and unique stories about ancient wars. Subscribe so you don't miss them, and we'll get back to the story. 15 Belgic tribes formed coalition in February 57 BC. The Bellovaci contributed 60,000 warriors, the Suessiones 50,000, the Nervii 50,000, smaller tribes adding thousands each. Total mobilization reached 300,000 fighting men, the largest army Gaul had ever assembled. They elected the Suessians King Galba as supreme commander. Messengers raced between tribes, coordinating assembly points and supply trains. Every warrior over 15 received summons. This was total war. Caesar's intelligence network reported the mobilization within days. Gallic merchants loyal to Rome, tribal informants bribed with silver, captured scouts tortured for information. The reports were consistent and terrifying. 300,000 warriors marching south to destroy the legions before Roman power became unbreakable. Caesar had 30,000 legionaries and maybe 20,000 Gallic auxiliaries of questionable loyalty. 10-1 odds. He recruited 2 new legions immediately, pulling Roman citizens from settlements across Cisalpine Gaul. Green soldiers, barely trained, but they had shields and obeyed orders. The Belgae strategy was sound. Concentrate overwhelming force, crush the legions in single massive battle, burn Roman supply depots, isolate Caesar north of the province. Without supplies or reinforcements, the Roman army would starve or surrender by summer. Gallic tribes south of Belgic territories would rise in support, cutting Caesar's retreat. It was the best plan any Gallic coalition had developed, coordinated and comprehensive. Caesar didn't wait for them to implement it. April brought dry roads and sprouting grain. He marched north with 8 legions, 40,000 men moving at forced pace, 25 miles daily. The Belgae were still gathering, still organizing supply chains, still arguing about command structure. Caesar hit the Remi tribe first, isolated Belgic allies who'd sent intelligence to Rome. He offered alliance. They accepted instantly, terrified of the approaching Belgae army. Their territory became Caesar's forward base. The Belgic coalition arrived outside Remi territory in May. Their camp stretched for miles. Hundreds of thousands of warriors from dozens of tribes, each maintaining separate identities and leaderships. Coordinating that mass required constant council meetings and compromise. Germanic-descended Belgae distrusted Celtic-descended Belgae. The Nervii considered themselves superior warriors and resented taking orders from Suession's nobles. The coalition was powerful but fragile. Caesar fortified a hill near the Ain River, digging trenches and building ramparts. He positioned 8 legions on high ground behind field fortifications that would have required days for the Belgae to assault. Then he waited. The Belgic army surrounded his position and discovered the Romans had stockpiled grain for months. Starving them out was impossible. Assaulting uphill against trenches meant casualties beyond calculation. The coalition faced strategic paralysis. The Belgae tried diplomacy. Ambassadors offered Caesar tribute and hostages if Romans would withdraw from Belgic territories. Caesar demanded unconditional surrender. The ambassadors returned to camp reporting Roman commander was insane or suicidal. He faced 300,000 warriors with 40,000 soldiers and demanded they surrender. Galba called council to discuss options. While they debated, their supplies ran low. 300,000 men and their followers consumed food at catastrophic rates. The coalition dissolved through hunger. Tribes began departing nightly, returning to protect their own territories and harvest their own fields. The Bellovaci left first, claiming their lands were threatened. Others followed. Within 2 weeks, the massive army had fragmented into individual tribal forces scattered across Belgic territory. Caesar's strategy became obvious. He'd never intended to fight them united. He'd waited for logistics to destroy what combat couldn't. The legions pursued retreating tribes individually. The Suessiones, caught during withdrawal, surrendered after brief siege of their main town. Caesar took hostages, confiscated weapons, moved on. The Bellovaci, largest tribe, submitted without fighting when 12 Roman cohorts appeared outside their capital. Caesar's clemency was calculated. Quick surrenders received light terms. Resistance received annihilation. The message spread faster than cavalry. Only the Nervi refused terms. They occupied densely forested territory, perfect for ambush, and their warriors considered surrender equivalent to death. 50,000 Nervi fighters prepared to demonstrate why Belgic tribes claimed military superiority over softer southern Gauls. They'd seen Romans slaughter the Helvetian Germans through superior organisation. The Nervi planned to hit Romans before organisation mattered, during vulnerable moments when formations meant nothing. Caesar marched toward Nervi territory with 6 legions. 2 remained garrisoning conquered towns. 60 miles from Nervi borders near the Sabes River, his army began constructing daily camp. Standard procedure, done so often it was reflex. Soldiers stacked javelins, removed armour, grabbed entrenching tools. The 7th and 12th legions secured the perimeter. Other legions began digging ramparts. Behind them, baggage trains snaked toward the campsite, undefended and vulnerable. The forest across the Sabes River stood silent. The Nervi exploded from the tree line like a dam breaking. 50,000 warriors crossing the river at sprint, shields raised, spears levelled. They'd hidden in the forest for 2 days, watching Roman approach, waiting for this exact moment. Legions divided, armour removed, weapons stacked, attention focused on construction. The ambush was perfectly timed. The first Romans to die never saw attackers coming. The 7th and 12th legions barely had time to form testudo, shield walls overhead and front. Soldiers packed so tight they breathed each other's sweat. Nervi spears punched through gaps, finding necks and groins. Warriors climbed atop the formations, stabbing downward, pulling shields apart with bare hands. Roman soldiers inside the testudos couldn't swing swords, couldn't maneuver, could only crouch and pray while bronze dented under impact. The formations held for maybe 5 minutes before Nervi numbers cracked them like eggshells. The 9th and 10th legions were worse positioned. They'd been digging ditches, tools in hand, armour stacked in neat piles 50 yards away. Nervi warriors reached them before most soldiers grabbed weapons. Legionaries fought with entrenching spades against spears. Centurions used their vinewood staffs as clubs. The 2 legions fragmented into individual combats, where Roman training meant nothing. A half-naked soldier with a shovel couldn't defeat an armoured warrior with a spear and shield. Caesar was with the baggage train when screaming started. He grabbed a horse, rode toward combat without helmet or armour, just the scarlet cloak marking his rank. The scene that greeted him was catastrophe. 2 legions pinned against the riverbank, fighting for survival. 2 more legions scattered across the construction site in isolated pockets. The 8th legion nowhere visible, presumably overrun completely. 60,000 Romans and auxiliaries caught unprepared by an enemy that materialized from forest like supernatural punishment. The general seized a shield from a dying soldier and rode directly into the thickest combat. Officers, seeing that scarlet cloak, rallied around him. Caesar shouted orders no one could hear over battle noise, but his presence communicated what words couldn't. Command hadn't abandoned them. Hierarchy still existed. Therefore, the situation remained salvageable. Soldiers fighting alone suddenly fought in groups. Groups merged into cohorts. Cohorts reformed partial battle lines. The 12th Legion centurions were dying in clusters. Every man bearing centurion's transverse crest became target for Navio warriors hunting leadership. 60-year-old veterans who'd fought in Syria and Spain, cut down by tribal spearmen who'd never left Belgic forests. Their deaths should have shattered unit cohesion. Instead, junior officers promoted themselves by picking up fallen staffs. Optios became centurions. Common soldiers became optios, command structure regenerating faster than Nervi could decapitate it. The fighting compressed legions against the Sabis River. Water ran red, literally. Thousands of wounded bleeding into the current, corpses damming the shallows. Romans trapped between riverbank and Nervi advance faced impossible choice: drown or die on spears. Some chose water, most chose combat. Legionaries locked shields in final stands, selling lives for minutes while comrades behind them formed desperate formations. The Nervi momentum stalled against Roman desperation. Warriors who'd been advancing in unified charge found themselves fighting individual battles against pockets that refused to break. A single cohort surrounded held position for an hour, while Nervi attacks shattered against their shields. The soldiers inside that pocket died to the last man, but they consumed enough Nervi warriors to create a gap in the assault's continuity. Caesar spotted the 13th and 14th legions approaching from the camp's rear. They'd been furthest from the Nervi ambush, had time to arm properly and form regulation battle lines. Fresh troops, rested, organised. He redirected them toward the 9th and 10th legions' collapsing positions. The sight of reinforcements arriving in proper formation, shields locked, standards raised, centurions calling cadence, injected hope into soldiers who'd been contemplating surrender. The 13th Legion hit the Nervi flank like a battering ram. Warriors who'd been focused on destroying scattered Romans suddenly faced a coherent formation, advancing in textbook triple line. Javelins arced from Roman ranks, iron points punching through Nervi shields and chests. The Germanic-descended warriors didn't retreat. They turned to face this new threat, dividing their attention between two separate combats. Military academics would later identify this moment as the battle's turning point, when Nervii aggression became strategic liability. Nervii warriors fought with a cultural imperative Romans couldn't comprehend. Retreat was literally unthinkable, programmed out of their society through shame mechanisms and honor codes. A warrior who ran became non-person, expelled from family, denied burial rites. Death in combat guaranteed feasting in the afterlife. This belief system created soldiers who charged shield walls until physically incapable of continuing, even when tactical withdrawal would have preserved the army. The afternoon sun turned combat into an endurance test fought in summer heat. Soldiers on both sides collapsed from exhaustion, not wounds. Dehydration killed men who'd survived spear thrusts. The Nervi had been fighting for 6 hours straight, sustaining maximum intensity that human bodies can't maintain indefinitely. Romans rotated fighters when possible, pulling exhausted soldiers from front ranks and replacing them with reserves. The Atuatusi tribe, Nervi allies, had been marching to join the battle. They appeared on a ridgeline overlooking the Sabes, 20,000 warriors strong, and witnessed the carnage below. The Nervi were dying in piles. Roman formations had solidified. Fresh legions were arriving. The Atuatuci turned around and marched home. Their scouts reported this decision to the Nervi commanders an hour later. Whatever hope remained in Nervi ranks evaporated. The Romans sensed the shift before they saw evidence. Nervi attacks became less coordinated, individuals seeking death rather than victory. Warriors throwing themselves on Roman swords with expressions suggesting relief, the battle transitioned from combat to execution, legionaries advancing over corpse layers so thick they provided footing above the mud. Cavalry circled the flanks, hunting survivors attempting to flee despite cultural prohibitions against retreat. The nervy nobility died almost completely. Chiefs and their sons formed final shield wall on a low mound surrounded by thousands of Roman soldiers. They sang death songs while javelins killed them in waves. When the singing stopped, legionaries advanced and found 600 noblemen dead, still standing propped against each other in formation. Not one had turned his back to the enemy. Casualty counts emerged slowly as Romans searched the battlefield. 43 centurions dead from the 12th Legion alone, 2/3 of their command structure gone. The 8th Legion lost 60% of its effective strength. Total Roman deaths exceeded 4,000, with another 6,000 wounded seriously enough to require weeks of recovery. Caesar had nearly lost the entire army to an ambush he should have anticipated. Nervy casualties defied belief. Of 50,000 warriors who crossed the Sabes, fewer than 500 survived to surrender. Their tribe's military power ceased to exist in a single afternoon. The survivors, old men, women, children, numbered around 8,000 from a pre-war population of 100,000. The nervy had achieved what they sought, dying in battle rather than submitting to Rome. Their cultural victory was also their genocide. Caesar granted the nervy survivors mercy that was actually calculated cruelty. He returned their territory, allowed them to rebuild, demanded no tribute. Neighbouring tribes were forbidden from seizing Novae lands. The clemency served perfect strategic purpose. A destroyed tribe that Rome showed compassion toward became propaganda. Other Belgic peoples received the message, resist and die, or surrender and receive terms. The Atuatuci represented a more interesting problem. They'd abandoned the nervy mid-battle, demonstrating unreliability. They'd also fortified their main oppidum, a hilltop settlement protected by natural cliffs and massive timber walls. 20,000 fighting-age males defended 50,000 total population in a fortress that had never fallen to assault. Caesar's engineers examined the position and calculated siege would require months. The legions constructed siege works while Atuatuci defenders watched from walls, mocking Roman efforts. They'd seen Roman camps built before, Roman fortifications, Roman discipline. None of it impressed warriors whose ancestors had fought Julius Caesar's uncle decades earlier and survived. They threw rocks at legionaries digging approach trenches. They displayed captured Roman equipment as trophies. They seemed genuinely amused by the siege. Caesar's engineers assembled a siege tower, 10 stories tall, movable on wheeled base, fitted with drawbridge that could drop onto enemy ramparts. Construction required 3 weeks and consumed forests worth of timber. The Atuatuci watched it rise, their mockery gradually silencing as the tower's scale became apparent. They'd never seen siege equipment beyond battering rams and ladders. This machine dwarfed their walls. The tower rolled forward on its final night of construction, pushed by hundreds of soldiers on internal mechanisms. Atuatuci warriors gathered on walls to watch, weapons ready. The tower stopped just outside missile range. Its height allowed observers on top to see directly into the oppidum's streets and buildings. Romans made no attempt to assault. They simply positioned the tower and withdrew to their camps. The Atuatuci sent envoys at dawn requesting terms. They'd surrender weapons and accept reasonable tribute if Romans departed their territory. Caesar agreed to everything except the departure part. The Atuatuci would become subjects of Rome, would host a permanent garrison, would supply grain to Roman armies. They accepted. Over the next day, warriors carried weapons from the oppidum in wagons, swords, spears, shields, armour, enough equipment to outfit 15,000 fighters. The Romans noticed the numbers didn't match. 20,000 military-age males, but only 15,000 weapon sets delivered. Caesar's officers interviewed Atuatuci slaves who'd fled to Roman camps. The tribe had hidden weapons throughout the oppidum, buried in cellars and grain pits, planning night attack on Roman camps while they celebrated victory. The assault came midnight of the surrender day. Atuatuci warriors poured from the oppidum's gates carrying the hidden weapons, attacking Roman camps in darkness. They'd calculated Romans would be drunk and disorganized after accepting surrender. The calculation was catastrophically wrong. Caesar had anticipated treachery and kept legions under arms. Sentries raised alarm within seconds. Cohorts formed battle lines faster than Atuatuci could cross the distance. The slaughter lasted until dawn. Atuatuci warriors trapped in the killing ground between their fortress and Roman formations, cut down by soldiers who'd been woken from sleep and were therefore particularly murderous. Cavalry circled the oppidum, killing anyone attempting to escape. 4,000 Atuatuci died in the assault. Roman casualties, 12 wounded, none killed. Caesar ordered the oppidum stormed at first light. The siege tower rolled forward, drawbridge crashed onto walls, legionaries poured across. The Atuatuci inside offered no coordinated resistance. Their warriors were dead in the field. The population that remained consisted of women, children, elderly, and the small number of men too injured to fight. Romans rounded them up systematically, street by street, building by building. 53,000 people were sold at auction in a single day. Slave traders had followed Caesar's army across Gaul, knowing conquest produced inventory. They bid on Atuatuci by the hundred, buying families in lots like livestock. The prices were depressed. Too many slaves, not enough buyers. A healthy adult male fetched what a cheap sword cost. Children sold for the price of decent sandals. The Atuatuci tribe ceased to exist. Their oppidum was abandoned, walls dismantled, buildings burned. The territory was assigned to the Tungri tribe as reward for loyalty to Rome. Within a generation, nothing marked where the Atuatuci had lived except foundations and grave mounds. Their language was forgotten. Their gods stopped receiving worship. Rome had discovered industrial-scale ethnic erasure. The Belg campaign ended in September 57 BC. Caesar sent dispatches to Rome claiming complete victory over northern Gaul. The Senate declared 15 days of thanksgiving, unprecedented honour for ongoing military operations. Caesar's political enemies in Rome found themselves isolated. How could they criticise a general who'd conquered 300,000 barbarians and expanded Roman territory to the ocean? The ocean, Caesar's next obsession. The Atlantic coast remained unconquered, controlled by the Veneti tribe who commanded the richest maritime trade network in Western Europe. They built ships larger than Roman galleys, sailed routes to Britannia that Romans had only heard about in travellers' tales. Their coastal fortresses stood on peninsulas accessible only during low tide. They'd never submitted to Mediterranean power. Caesar spent winter of 57 to 56 BC building a fleet. His soldiers, raised in Italian and Gallic inland territories, knew nothing about naval warfare. They learned. Engineers studied captured Veneti ships, copying designs and improving them. Gallic civilians were conscripted as rowers. Weapons were adapted for ship-to-ship combat. By spring, Caesar commanded a fleet of hundreds of vessels crewed by men who'd been farmers and soldiers 6 months earlier. The Veneti watched Roman preparations with contempt. They'd been sailing the Atlantic for centuries. Their ships had reinforced hulls that handled ocean storms, leather sails that worked in any wind, anchors and cables stronger than anything Romans could build. A single Veneti vessel could ram and sink 3 Roman galleys. They had 220 warships and total confidence in their maritime superiority. The naval battle occurred in Quiberon Bay in summer 56 BC. The Veneti fleet sailed out to meet Romans in formation, ships so tall their decks stood higher than Roman masts. The initial engagement went exactly as Veneti expected. Their vessels were faster, more manoeuvrable, better designed. Roman rams couldn't penetrate Veneti hulls. Roman boarding attempts failed because Veneti ships stood too high above water. Caesar's engineers had prepared a counterweapon. Long poles fitted with sharp hooks, specifically designed to grab Veneti rigging. Roman crews used these poles to catch enemy halyards, the ropes supporting sails. Once hooked, legionaries soared through the ropes and dropped Veneti sails. Without sails, the ships became immobile. Without mobility, they became targets. The wind died. Atlantic weather betrayed the Veneti at the exact wrong moment. Their remaining ships sat dead in the water while Roman galleys, propelled by oars, maintained full maneuverability. The battle transformed from naval combat to systematic capture. Romans surrounded individual Veneti vessels, boarded them from multiple angles, killed the crews, or accepted surrender. 220 Veneti warships were destroyed or captured in a single afternoon. Their entire maritime power evaporated because wind conditions shifted during combat. The Veneti leadership surrendered, expecting traditional Gallic treatment, hostages, tribute, alliance terms. Caesar executed them all. Every noble, every ship captain, every man who'd held authority. The Veneti population was sold as slaves. The Atlantic coast became Roman territory. Britannia beckoned across the Channel, the mysterious island where tin came from, where Druids trained, where Gallic refugees fled Roman conquest. Caesar launched 2 expeditions to Britannia in 55 and 54 BC. Both were near disasters from military perspective. Storms destroyed ships, British tribes harassed landing forces, logistics nearly collapsed. But both expeditions achieved their real purpose. Caesar became the first Roman general to cross the ocean and survive. Rome celebrated each Britannia expedition as though Caesar had conquered new worlds. The propaganda value exceeded any military gains. Senators who'd criticized Caesar's ambitions found themselves defending positions that sounded like cowardice. Why oppose a general brave enough to sail beyond the known world? Caesar's debts were forgotten. His political power had become unchallengeable through military glory. Gaul in 53 BC resembled a pacified province. Roman roads connected tribal territories. Tax collectors inventoried Gallic wealth. Merchants from Italy flooded markets, selling Roman goods and buying Gallic resources. Young Gallic nobles were educated in Latin and adopted Roman customs. It looked like successful integration. It was a thin crust over volcanic pressure. The pressure came from Roman greed. Publicani, private tax collectors who'd purchased collection rights from the state, extracted wealth from Gaul with criminal efficiency. They demanded grain requisitions that left villages starving. They assessed property taxes that forced farmers to sell children to pay debts. They charged interest rates that created permanent servitude. The Publicani answered to Roman investors, not to provincial administrators, which meant their abuses had no oversight. The Eburones tribe, occupying modern Belgium, reached breaking point in winter, 54 to 53 BC. Roman quartermasters had requisitioned grain supplies meant to last until spring harvest. Villages faced starvation. The Eburones' king Ambiorix, who'd been Rome's ally throughout the conquest, sent desperate messages requesting reduced requisitions. The Roman commanders in Eburones' territory refused. Orders were orders. Deliver grain or face military action. Ambiorix did mathematics. His people would starve if they gave Rome the grain. Rome would kill them if they didn't. Either way, Eberons died. He chose rebellion, not because he thought he could win. He knew the full weight of Roman military power. He chose rebellion because watching his people starve felt worse than dying on his feet. The calculation was emotional, not strategic, which made it unpredictable and therefore dangerous. The massacre happened before dawn. The Roman camp housing the 14th Legion, 6,000 soldiers plus support staff, woke to find itself surrounded by Eberron's warriors. Ambiorix requested meeting under truce flag. The legion's commanders Sabinus and Cotta debated whether to trust him. Sabinus argued for hearing him out. Cotta suspected ambush. They met with Ambiorix. He explained the situation with brutal honesty. Every Gallic tribe was planning coordinated uprising. The Eberons alone couldn't protect Romans from the coming storm. If the 14th Legion marched immediately to join Caesar's main force 60 miles south, Ambiorix would provide safe passage. If they stayed, they'd be caught in tribal coalition attack and destroyed. He swore by his gods and ancestors this information was accurate. Sabinus believed him. Cotta didn't. The legion's command split publicly during council meeting. Junior officers took sides. Centurions argued tactics. Eventually Sabinus's position won. They'd march south to safety at dawn. The legion broke camp, formed marching column, and stepped into the forest road. Ambiorix had lied about everything except the part where staying meant death. The forest road compressed the Roman column into a narrow target 2 miles long. The 14th Legion marched in standard formation: vanguard cohorts, baggage train, rear guard, but the trees prevented proper deployment. Soldiers walked 4 abreast maximum, unable to see beyond the man in front. The wagon train carrying supplies and equipment slowed movement to crawling pace. Ambiorix's warriors had spent the night positioning themselves in the dense undergrowth on both sides of the road. The attack came from everywhere simultaneously. Javelins whistling from tree lines, warriors charging from concealed positions, rocks and logs rolled down slopes into the column. The Romans couldn't form testudo effectively. The forest prevented cohort-level coordination. Individual sentries tried to organize defense but found themselves isolated by terrain and surrounded by Eberons who knew every game trail and hiding spot. Sabinus panicked immediately. He'd believed Ambiorix, had convinced the legion to march, now bore responsibility for the disaster. He sent messengers requesting another parley, offering surrender terms, begging for safe passage. The messengers returned with their throats cut. Cotta assumed command by default and tried implementing defensive doctrine designed for open ground combat, not forest ambush. His orders made tactical sense but couldn't be executed by soldiers trapped between trees and enemy warriors. The fighting lasted 9 hours, not a battle, an execution. Eberron's warriors attacked in waves, withdrew when Romans mounted defence, returned when different section of column became vulnerable. They targeted officers specifically, killing anyone whose equipment or position suggested command authority. Centurions died defending standards, optios died trying to rally broken cohorts, common legionaries died because no one remained to give orders. Sabinus died begging for mercy. Eberronus surrounded him and his command group, stripped them of weapons, dragged them before Ambiorix. The legate tried negotiating even as warriors bound his hands. He offered tribute, hostages, Roman withdrawal from Eberron's territory. Ambiorix listened politely, then killed him with a spear thrust to the chest. Cotta had already fallen in combat, wounded dozens of times but refusing to yield. A few hundred legionaries cut their way through Eberron's lines and escaped into the forest. The rest, nearly 6,000 soldiers, died in the trees. Ambiorix sent messengers to every tribe in Gaul before Roman authorities learned of the massacre. The message was simple: Rome's legions could be destroyed. One tribe, acting alone, had annihilated an entire legion. Imagine what united Gaul could accomplish. The Nervi, reduced to remnants after their earlier defeat, joined immediately. The Atuatuci survivors, enslaved and escaped, returned seeking revenge. The Menapii, who'd never submitted to Rome, mobilized their full strength. The coordinated uprising struck Roman positions across Gaul within weeks. The 9th Legion's winter camp in Nervi territory came under siege from thousands of warriors who'd learned Roman siege tactics by being victims of them. They dug approach trenches, built mantlets for cover, even attempted siege towers copied from Roman designs. The attacks came every night for weeks, wearing down defenders through exhaustion rather than direct assault. Caesar was south of the Alps when reports reached him. One legion destroyed, another besieged, Gallic tribes in open rebellion, and the Alpine passes filling with snow that would close them until spring. His political enemies in Rome demanded he return to face questions about the military disaster. His creditors, sensing weakness, began calling in loans. Everything Caesar had built, military reputation, political power, financial stability, threatened to collapse because one Gallic chieftain had successfully lied to a gullible legate. He forced a passage through the Alps with a single legion in December, through snow that buried horses and killed soldiers through exposure. The march took 2 weeks and left a trail of frozen corpses marking the route. Caesar emerged in Gaul with 5,000 exhausted soldiers to face tribal rebellions, involving hundreds of thousands of warriors. The strategic situation was impossible. He attacked anyway. The relief of the 9th Legion's camp became case study in Roman military psychology. Caesar arrived with his legion and immediately assaulted the besieging Nervi from behind. The timing was perfect. His soldiers, frozen and exhausted from Alpine crossing, welcomed combat as opportunity to warm up through violence. The Nervi, expecting reinforcements from south in spring, found Caesar's army arriving in the death of winter like supernatural retribution. The Nervi siege broke within hours. Warriors who'd been methodically wearing down the 9th Legion suddenly fought for their own survival against fresh Roman troops attacking from the direction they'd left unguarded. Caesar's cavalry, small force of Gallic auxiliaries who'd remained loyal, circled the flanks and cut down fleeing Nervi. The siege transformed into rout, and the rout became massacre that ended with Nervi corpses freezing in the snow. Caesar consolidated his scattered legions through forced winter marches that violated every principle of Roman military doctrine. Armies didn't campaign in winter. Supply lines couldn't function through frozen roads. Soldiers couldn't fight effectively in conditions that froze fingers and made armor painful to wear. He ignored doctrine and pushed his men to limits that killed some and hardened others into weapon forged through suffering. The Ebrons became his obsession. Ambiorix had destroyed a Roman legion and triggered the rebellion. Caesar wanted him dead more than he wanted military victory. The hunt consumed the spring of 53 BC. Romans burned Eburon's villages, slaughtered livestock, destroyed grain stores, cut down orchards. Refugees fleeing into forests found Roman cavalry waiting. Those captured faced interrogation about Ambiorix's location, followed by execution regardless of answers provided. Ambiorix evaded capture through combination of luck, intelligence, and willingness to abandon his people. He moved constantly, never sleeping in the same location twice, maintaining communication through trusted messengers who knew only partial information. Caesar's frustration grew as reports placed the Eburon's king everywhere and nowhere, supposedly sighted in 3 different territories on the same day, apparently capable of travelling faster than cavalry. The Eburon's tribe was exterminated as punishment for their king's survival. Every village burned, every warrior killed, every woman and child sold to slave traders. Roman soldiers herded Eburonean civilians like livestock, separating those valuable for sale from those cheaper to kill. The genocide was systematic and thorough. The tribal territory was declared open to any neighbouring peoples who wished to settle it, free land for anyone except Eburones. Within a year, the Eburones had been erased from Gaul so completely that their name survived only in Roman histories listing people Caesar had destroyed. The Veneti presented a completely different challenge. They controlled Atlantic maritime trade routes that generated wealth exceeding inland territories by orders of magnitude. Tin from Britannia, amber from the northern coasts, exotic goods from beyond the known world, all flowed through Veneti ports. Their ships, built for ocean travel, dwarfed Mediterranean galleys. Their harbours, constructed on tidal peninsulas, became island fortresses twice daily when the tide went out. Roman naval doctrine was designed for Mediterranean warfare. Ramming tactics, boarding actions, battles fought in relatively calm water. The Atlantic was fundamentally different ocean. Storms appeared without warning. Tides rose and fell 20 feet. Waves capable of capsizing galleys were considered normal weather. The Veneti had adapted their ships over centuries to these conditions. Romans had months to learn or die. Caesar's engineers built ships through trial and catastrophic error. Early designs capsized during sea trials. Keels broke in rough water. Masts snapped in Atlantic winds. Each failure taught lessons paid for in drowned soldiers. Eventually they developed hybrid vessels combining Roman galley speed with Veneti hull strength. The fleet that eventually fought the Veneti incorporated innovations from a dozen cultures and represented the fastest maritime technological development in Roman history. The Veneti watched Roman preparations with confidence bordering on arrogance. They'd seen Mediterranean navies before, had traded with Greek and Carthaginian merchants for generations. Roman military power meant nothing against ocean storms and ships designed by people who understood Atlantic sailing. The Veneti fleet of 220 warships represented the culmination of centuries of maritime evolution. Caesar's hastily built armada seemed like expensive comedy. The battle in Quiberon Bay started as Veneti demonstration of superiority. Their ships, taller and heavier than Roman vessels, simply rammed through the enemy fleet like cavalry through infantry. Roman attempts at boarding failed because Veneti decks stood 12 feet above waterline. Grappling hooks bounced off reinforced hulls. Rams designed to puncture Mediterranean galleys barely scratched Atlantic-ready construction. The Veneti were winning so decisively they started toying with Roman ships, circling and taunting. Caesar's secret weapons were scythe-equipped poles, long wooden arms with curved blades at the end specifically designed to cut ship rigging. Roman crews had practiced using them for weeks, developing techniques to hook enemy halyards and saw through rope. When Veneti ships came close to ram or taunt, Roman vessels deployed the scythes and targeted the ropes holding up enemy sails. The first Veneti ship lost its sails and went dead in the water. The crew, confused more than concerned, attempted to raise spare rigging. Romans surrounded the immobilized vessel and boarded from multiple angles. The Veneti fought hard, but the disadvantage of height that had protected them became trap once they lost mobility. A ship designed to repel boarders from below became slaughter ground when attackers climbed from 5 directions simultaneously. The wind died completely around noon. Atlantic weather patterns that usually favoured local sailors betrayed the Veneti at the worst possible moment. Their remaining 200-plus ships sat motionless, while Roman galleys, propelled by slave and soldier rowers, maintained full manoeuvrability. The battle stopped being naval combat and became hunting expedition. Romans picked off Veneti vessels one by one, cutting rigging and boarding each ship methodically. The Veneti crews chose combat over surrender, in proportions that shocked even Roman veterans. Ship captains and their men fought to last breath, refusing quarter when offered, jumping into ocean rather than accepting capture. Romans interpreted this as savage stupidity. The Veneti understood economic reality. Captured experienced sailors became galley slaves, which was fate worse than drowning. Better to die free in familiar waters than spend years chained to oars. By evening, 220 Veneti warships had been destroyed or captured. The entire Veneti navy ceased to exist in 8 hours. Their coastal fortresses, designed to resist land assault, couldn't survive blockade by Roman fleet now controlling the sea. The Veneti leadership surrendered within weeks, expecting treatment similar to what other defeated Gallic tribes received: hostages, tribute, absorption into Roman territory as subordinate allies. Caesar ordered every Veneti chief and ship captain executed. Public crucifixions on the beaches where Veneti sailors had launched their vessels. The bodies hung for weeks, visible from the sea, messages to any tribe that controlled resources Rome wanted. The Veneti population, men, women, children, was sold wholesale to slave traders. The Romans weren't just conquering territory, they were erasing maritime competition. The Atlantic coast submitted within months. Tribes that had never seen Roman soldiers suddenly faced legions marching through territories that existed in Roman geography only as vague rumours. Caesar received submission from peoples whose names Romans couldn't pronounce, whose locations couldn't be mapped accurately, whose existence hadn't been confirmed until scouts returned with tribal ambassadors. Britannia called from across the channel like siren song. The mysterious island featured prominently in Gallic culture. Druids trained there, refugees fled there, trade goods originated there. Roman knowledge of Britannia consisted mostly of merchant tales and speculation. No Roman military force had ever attempted crossing. Caesar decided to invade with zero accurate intelligence, minimal preparation, and complete confidence that Roman superiority would overcome any obstacle. The first Britannia expedition in 55 BC was near disaster, saved only by luck and British disorganisation. Caesar landed with 2 legions, discovered British tribes massed on the beaches, and managed to establish foothold through desperate combat. Storms destroyed half his fleet before it reached shore. British chariots, warriors fighting from horse-drawn vehicles in tactics Romans had never encountered, harassed Roman positions constantly. The expedition achieved nothing militarily but generated massive propaganda value. Caesar had crossed the ocean. Previous Romans couldn't even imagine crossing the ocean. The political impact exceeded the military failure. The Second Britannia expedition in 54 BC was larger, better prepared, and still nearly collapsed. 5 legions plus cavalry crossed the Channel, established beachheads, and marched inland against British coalition led by chieftain named Cassivellaunus. The British used terrain masterfully, attacking supply lines, avoiding pitched battles, melting into forests and marshes when Romans advanced. Only by capturing Cassivellaunus's stronghold did Caesar force nominal submission. Both expeditions generated triumph celebrations in Rome despite achieving minimal conquest. Caesar had ventured beyond the known world twice, and survived. The expeditions added nothing to Roman territory, produced minimal plunder, cost legions worth of casualties. They succeeded because they fed Roman cultural obsession with being the people who conquered everything, even the impossible. Gaul seemed pacified by 53 BC. Roads connected tribal territories. Roman camps had evolved into permanent forts. Gallic nobles educated their sons in Latin. Merchants from Italy operated in every major settlement. The integration appeared comprehensive. Caesar sent optimistic reports to Rome describing peaceful province, generating revenue and providing recruits for Roman armies. The reality underneath was volcanic pressure building toward eruption. Roman tax collectors extracted wealth at rates that made previous tribal tribute systems seem generous. Gallic farmers who'd been free landowners became debt slaves to Roman creditors. Villages that had been self-sufficient were forced to sell goods at Roman-controlled prices while buying Roman imports at inflated rates. The economic exploitation was sophisticated, legal, and unsustainable. Vercingetorix emerged from this pressure like natural disaster given human form. Young Arverni noble, probably 30 years old, trained in Roman military tactics because his tribe had allied with Caesar early in the conquest. He spoke Latin, understood Roman organization, had studied how legions fought. His father had been executed years earlier for attempting to make himself king of the Arverni, a crime in tribal society that valued collective leadership over monarchy. Vercingetorix inherited his father's ambition and added patience his father had lacked. He watched Ambiorix destroy a Roman legion. He observed the Veneti navy's annihilation. He studied how Caesar crushed tribal coalitions by exploiting their coordination failures and intertribal rivalries. Vercingetorix understood that defeating Rome required doing everything differently. Unified command, scorched earth tactics, avoiding pitched battles, attacking supply lines. He needed absolute authority, which meant becoming exactly what his father had died trying to become: king. The Arverni nobles rejected his initial arguments. They'd profited from Roman alliance, had secured favourable trade terms, had avoided the genocides that destroyed other tribes. Vercingetorix's warnings about ultimate Roman intentions seemed paranoid compared to their current prosperity. They expelled him from Arverni territory in late 53 BC, not for being wrong but for being dangerous. Ambitious young men who spoke of kingship had tendency to trigger Roman intervention. Vercingetorix recruited the dispossessed instead. Escaped slaves, refugees from destroyed tribes, warriors who'd lost families to Roman conquest. He gathered them in neutral territory and began building army from people who had nothing to lose. His recruiting pitch was brutally honest. Rome will eventually destroy every Gallic tribe, will enslave your families, will erase your culture. Die free now or die enslaved later. Choose. The Carnutes tribe initiated the rebellion in January 52 BC by massacring Roman merchants and tax collectors in Cenabum. The violence was spontaneous, driven by local grievances, completely uncoordinated with other tribes. Vercingetorix seized the moment. He raced to Arverni territory with his army of dispossessed, entered the capital before nobles could expel him again, and forced a choice: accept him as war leader, or fight the Romans alone. The Arverni chose survival. Vercingetorix became king. Vercingetorix's strategy violated every principle of Gallic warfare. Tribal tradition demanded meeting enemies in open battle where courage and individual prowess determined victory. He ordered scorched earth instead. Burn your own towns, destroy your own grain stores, evacuate populations to fortified positions, deny Romans shelter, food, and targets. Let winter and logistics accomplish what warriors couldn't: the systematic destruction of Caesar's army through starvation and exposure. 20 Gallic towns burned in the first month of rebellion. Their populations watched generations of construction reduced to ash on Vercingetorix's orders. Families that had lived in the same homes for lifetimes carried what they could and walked away from burning neighbourhoods. The smoke visible for miles served dual purpose: destroyed resources Romans needed, and announced that traditional Gallic society was ending. The old rules were dead. Caesar was trapped south of the Alps when the rebellion exploded. Political crisis in Rome demanded his presence. Rivals were manoeuvring to strip his command. Creditors were calling loans. Senate factions wanted him prosecuted for exceeding his authority in Gaul. Returning to Rome meant abandoning his legions during the largest Gallic uprising since the conquest began. Staying in Gaul meant political suicide. He chose the impossible third option. The general forced passage through the Cevennes mountains in February with a single legion. The passes were blocked with snow 8 feet deep. His soldiers dug tunnels through drifts, carried supplies on their backs, advanced maybe a mile per day. 20 soldiers froze to death during the crossing. The rest emerged in Gaul with frostbite, exhaustion, and burning desire to make someone pay for their suffering. Caesar pointed them at Arverni territory. The raid was pure psychological warfare. Caesar's legion couldn't conquer Arverni lands. They lacked numbers, supplies, and strategic position. They could burn, kill, and terrify. Arverni villages that had been evacuated under Vercingetorix's orders suddenly faced Roman soldiers who'd marched through impossible terrain specifically to destroy them. The message was clear. Caesar could reach anywhere, any time, regardless of weather or geography. Nowhere was safe. Vercingetorix faced his first strategic crisis. His entire strategy required maintaining Gallic unity through discipline and shared sacrifice. But Arverni civilians were being slaughtered while he maintained scorched earth policy elsewhere. Tribal pressure to defend Arverni territory threatened to fracture his coalition before it fully formed. He compromised, sent cavalry to harass the Roman raiders while maintaining the overall defensive strategy. The cavalry fought bravely and died uselessly. Roman formations absorbed their attacks and continued systematic destruction. Caesar linked up with his main army near Agedincum in March. 10 legions now, 50,000 soldiers plus auxiliaries, the largest Roman force assembled in Gaul. Vercingetorix commanded approximately 80,000 infantry and 15,000 cavalry from dozens of tribes. The numbers slightly favoured Gauls, but the quality gap remained enormous. Roman legionaries trained daily, fought in practice formations, followed complex orders. Gallic warriors trained intermittently, fought as individuals and struggled with coordination beyond tribal level. The Gallic War Council debated strategy in mountain fortresses where Roman spies couldn't penetrate. Vercingetorix argued for continuing scorched earth, avoiding battle, waiting for Roman supplies to collapse. Tribal chiefs wanted battle, honourable combat where Gallic courage could prove itself against Roman discipline. The debate represented fundamental cultural collision between Mediterranean systematic warfare and Celtic individual heroism. Vercingetorix won the argument but barely, and only by threatening to withdraw Arverni forces if chiefs chose suicide over strategy. The Bituriges tribe broke Gallic unity through desperation. Their territory lay directly in Caesar's path and contained over 20 prosperous towns. Vercingetorix's orders required burning all of them and evacuating populations to fortified positions. The Bituriges begged to spare Avaricum, their greatest settlement. The town sat on a hill surrounded by rivers and marshes, accessible only via narrow causeway. Its walls were Gallic construction, massive timbers interlaced with stone, creating structure that absorbed battering rams and catapult fire. Avaricum had never fallen to assault. The Bituriges argued that Avaricum's defences made it the perfect location to bleed the Roman army. Caesar would be forced to conduct lengthy siege during early spring when supplies were scarcest. The siege would consume time and resources while exposing Romans to Gallic harassment. Vercingetorix opposed the plan viscerally. Static defence against Romans was suicide. But the political pressure was unbearable. Denying the Bituriges any hope of saving their greatest town might shatter the coalition. He compromised again, agreeing to garrison Avaricum while maintaining mobile force nearby to attack Roman supply lines. Caesar arrived at Avaricum in late March and began siege operations that demonstrated why Roman engineering terrified the ancient world. His legions constructed siege works that should have required months. A ramp approaching the walls, built from logs and earth, rising at precise angle to match the height of Avaricum's fortifications. 2 siege towers flanking the ramp, 10 stories tall, equipped with drawbridges and protected by hide coverings soaked in vinegar to resist fire. Mantlets, movable shields, protecting workers digging approach trenches. The construction consumed entire forests and employed thousands of soldiers working in shifts. The weather fought Romans as viciously as Gauls did. Spring rains turned construction sites into swamps. The siege ramp, built on marshy ground, began sinking under its own weight. Engineers drove pilings deeper, reinforced with additional timber, basically built a massive wooden structure on top of a platform on top of soggy earth. The technical challenge would have defeated any other army. Romans treated it as problem requiring solution and applied overwhelming labour and resources until physics yielded. Gallic defenders inside Avaricum watched Roman progress with growing horror. They'd expected Romans to attempt conventional siege, surround the town, starve defenders, perhaps try scaling ladders. This systematic construction of approach infrastructure was different. Romans weren't trying to take the town quickly. They were building the means to take it inevitably, brick by brick, log by log, mathematical certainty expressed through engineering. The defenders attempted sorties to burn siege works. Warriors snuck out at night carrying torches and oil, targeting the siege towers and ramp. Roman sentries caught most attempts. Those who reached the works found them protected by multiple layers of defence, ditches, stakes, patrol routes overlapping with precision. A few succeeded in starting fires. Roman fire brigades extinguished them within minutes. The construction continued without pause. Vercingetorix camped 15 miles away with the main Gallic army, raiding Roman supply convoys and foraging parties. His cavalry ranged across the countryside, killing small Roman units, and disappearing before reinforcements arrived. The strategy was working. Roman supplies dwindled. Soldiers went on half rations. Horses began dying from hunger. Caesar's army was slowly starving while building siege works that consumed their remaining strength. The crisis point arrived in late April. Caesar called council meeting where officers reported supplies exhausted and soldiers near mutiny from hunger. If the siege continued, the army would collapse from starvation before Avaricum fell. If they withdrew, Gallic morale would soar and more tribes would join the rebellion. Caesar presented the choice to his soldiers directly: abandon the siege or continue despite starvation. The legions voted to continue, not through patriotism or discipline, but through pride and spite. They'd spent a month building siege works in freezing rain and mud. They'd gone hungry while watching Avaricum's defenders eating regularly. The idea of walking away from finished siege works without taking the town was psychologically unbearable. Roman soldiers would rather starve to death than admit they couldn't accomplish what they'd started. The final assault began at dawn on the 27th day of siege. The siege towers rolled forward on log rollers, pushed by hundreds of soldiers operating internal mechanisms. The ramp, now solid despite marshy foundation, provided direct approach to Avaricum's walls. Legionaries poured across the drawbridges that dropped from siege towers onto ramparts. The Gallic defenders fought with frantic courage of people who understood this was the final moment. The walls held for 3 hours. Gallic warriors maintained shield walls on the ramparts, pushing back repeated Roman assaults. They dropped stones and boiling water on attackers below. They cut ropes on siege equipment. They fought with everything available, including kitchen knives and farming tools when proper weapons broke. The defence was magnificent and ultimately futile. Roman numbers simply overwhelmed through systematic rotation. Fresh cohorts replaced exhausted ones. Wounded legionaries were pulled from combat and replaced by reserves. The Romans fought like machine that couldn't be stopped, only delayed. The Gallic defenders fought like men who would tire, falter, and eventually die. By noon, Romans controlled sections of the ramparts. By mid-afternoon, they'd penetrated into the town proper. The slaughter inside Avaricum exceeded even Roman capacity for violence. Soldiers who'd been hungry for weeks, who'd built siege works in rain and mud, who'd lost comrades to Gallic raids, they entered the town carrying months of accumulated rage. The civilian population of 40,000 became targets. Women, children, elderly, anyone who moved. Legionaries hunted people through streets and alleys, into houses and cellars, anywhere victims tried to hide. The killing continued until darkness made it impractical to distinguish bodies from shadows. By morning, maybe 800 people remained alive from Avaricum's 40,000 population. The survivors were mostly women young enough for slave markets and children too small to have fled. The town itself was thoroughly plundered. Every piece of metal, every scrap of cloth, every kernel of grain. Roman soldiers who'd been starving yesterday now gorged themselves on Avaricum's stored food until they vomited. Caesar's dispatch to Rome described Avaricum as great victory. 40,000 enemies killed, major Gallic stronghold captured, rebel forces depleted. The Senate voted another thanksgiving. The reality was more complicated. Romans had won the siege but had consumed irreplaceable time and resources doing it. Vercingetorix's main army remained intact. His strategy of avoiding direct battle was succeeding, and Gallic morale hadn't collapsed despite Avaricum's fall. Vercingetorix addressed his tribal chiefs after Avaricum's destruction. His message was brutally honest. He'd been right about avoiding static defence. The Bituriges' insistence on defending their town had led to its destruction, and anyone who wanted to repeat that mistake was welcome to fight Romans alone. The speech was calculated risk. He was essentially saying, "I told you so," to allies whose people had just been massacred. It worked because he was correct and everyone knew it. The Aedui, Rome's oldest Gallic allies, wavered in their loyalty. They'd supported Caesar throughout the conquest, had provided grain and cavalry, had betrayed fellow Gauls to maintain Roman favour. Now they watched Avaricum's massacre and calculated odds. Rome was winning battles, but Vercingetorix was winning the strategic campaign. The Aedui leadership began secret negotiations with the Gallic coalition, while publicly maintaining alliance with Caesar. Caesar's next target was Gergovia, a hilltop fortress serving as Vercingetorix's headquarters. The town sat on a plateau surrounded by steep slopes, naturally defensible and stocked with supplies for extended siege. Taking it would require everything that had worked at Avaricum plus improvisation, because Gergovia's terrain was even more challenging. Caesar approached with 8 legions and confidence built on never having failed a siege. The assault on Gergovia revealed the limits of Roman invincibility. Caesar's initial attacks failed to secure key positions. His soldiers, advancing uphill against prepared defences, encountered exactly the terrain disadvantage that Roman doctrine taught them to avoid. Gallic warriors fighting downhill with gravity assisting their spear thrusts and rocks, rolling naturally toward attackers. The physics favoured defenders overwhelmingly. Caesar attempted night assault using picked troops who'd been promised bonuses for volunteering. They scaled the slopes in darkness, achieved surprise and briefly controlled sections of Gergovia's outer defences. Then dawn revealed how few of them there were and how far from support they'd advanced. Gallic counterattacks drove them back down the slopes in fighting retreat that became rout. 700 Roman soldiers died in the failed assault, including 46 centurions. the highest one-day centurion casualty count in the entire Gallic Wars. The defeat shattered Roman military reputation. Soldiers who'd believed themselves invincible suddenly questioned whether Caesar's strategy was divine inspiration or suicidal overconfidence. Gallic tribes that had been maintaining neutrality began open negotiations with Vercingetorix. The Aedui, watching Roman defeat at Gergovia, finally committed to rebellion. They massacred Roman merchants in their territories and declared for the Gallic coalition. The Aedui joining the rebellion transformed strategic situation completely. They controlled central Gaul's richest grain-producing territories and provided 15,000 cavalry to the Gallic army. More importantly, they'd been Rome's primary intelligence source. Every secret Roman plans, every strategy discussion, every weakness in legionary positions had been reported to Rome via Aedui informants. That information flow reversed. Now Vercingetorix knew Roman movements while Caesar operated blind. Caesar retreated from Gergovia in June with his army intact, but his invincibility shattered. Gallic warriors harassed the retreat, cavalry raids picked off stragglers, local tribes that had been too frightened to resist now attacked Roman foraging parties. The great conqueror who terrorized Gaul for 6 years was marching south toward the province looking beaten. Vercingetorix's strategy had worked. Avoid pitched battle, attack supplies, let Romans exhaust themselves against prepared defences. Gaul was winning. The war council among Gallic chiefs after Gergovia debated whether to let Caesar retreat or pursue and destroy him. Vercingetorix argued for letting him go. Caesar was leaving Gaul, which achieved their goal without risking everything in major battle. The tribal chiefs, smelling complete victory, demanded pursuit. If Caesar escaped back to the province, he'd return with reinforcements. Better to destroy his army now while it was retreating and demoralized. Vercingetorix yielded to democratic pressure despite knowing his strategy was sound. The decision would prove fatal. The Gallic cavalry caught Caesar's retreating army near the Vinjan River in late June. 15,000 mounted warriors against Roman infantry strung out in marching column, exactly the tactical scenario that should have resulted in Roman annihilation. Vercingetorix's riders circled the legions, launching javelins, withdrawing before Romans could respond, harassing the column like wolves testing a wounded elk. Caesar's Germanic cavalry auxiliaries, mercenaries he'd hired specifically to counter Gallic mounted superiority, met them in the open. The cavalry battle lasted 4 hours and ended with Gallic forces fleeing in complete disorder. The Germanic riders fought with systematic brutality that overwhelmed Gallic individual heroics. They didn't duel honourably or seek glory through single combat. They ganged up on isolated enemies, targeted horses to dismount riders, and pursued routing forces until exhaustion or death ended the chase. 3,000 Gallic cavalry died. The survivors scattered across the countryside carrying news of defeat. Vercingetorix's reputation for invincibility, carefully built through months of successful strategy, took its first major damage. Caesar recognized the moment. His retreat had been tactical withdrawal, but Roman soldiers didn't understand tactical anything. They understood winning and losing. The cavalry victory reversed the psychological momentum from Gergovia. Legionaries who'd been questioning their general's competence suddenly remembered why they'd feared him. The army stopped retreating and turned to face their pursuers. Caesar had manufactured reason to pursue Vercingetorix rather than fleeing from him. Vercingetorix made his fatal error by withdrawing to Alesia. The hilltop fortress offered perfect defensive position, plateau surrounded by steep slopes, good water supply, stored grain for months. His 80,000 infantry could hold those heights indefinitely against any assault. The decision made sense tactically. Strategically, it was suicide. He just placed his entire army in a fixed location where Caesar could pin it in place. Caesar arrived at Alesia in early July with approximately 60,000 legionaries and auxiliaries. He examined the position from multiple angles, consulted with his engineers, and ordered construction of fortifications that would make Avaricum's siege works look like practice exercises. The Romans would build walls around Alesia, not to assault the fortress, but to contain it. Starve out the defenders, turn their defensive advantage into trap. The circumvallation line stretched 11 miles around Alesia's base, trenches 15 feet deep, backed by ramparts 12 feet high, studded with towers every 80 feet. The outer trench was flooded by diverting nearby streams, creating water obstacle. Behind that, 2 more trenches filled with sharpened stakes. Behind those, the main rampart topped with wooden palisade and fighting platforms. The construction required moving millions of cubic feet of earth and timber. Roman soldiers worked in shifts, digging and building while defending against Gallic sorties that tried to disrupt construction. Vercingetorix recognized the trap too late. By the time Roman fortifications reached halfway completion, breaking through them required coordinated assault his forces couldn't execute. He sent his cavalry out before the Roman circumvallation closed completely. 15,000 riders escaping through gaps in the incomplete siege line. Their mission was critical. Ride to every Gallic tribe, demand they send every warrior immediately. Tell them Vercingetorix and 80,000 Gallic fighters would die if relief didn't arrive within weeks. The cavalry escape succeeded, but cost Vercingetorix his mobility. With cavalry gone, the infantry trapped at Alesia couldn't scout Roman positions, couldn't raid supply lines, couldn't threaten Roman camps. They could only wait on their plateau and hope relief arrived before starvation. The psychological shift from strategic offence to desperate defence infected Gallic morale like disease. Caesar's engineers began constructing a second line of fortifications facing outward from Alesia. The contravallation line extended 14 miles, longer than the inner ring because it had to encompass more ground. Same design as the inner fortifications, trenches, ramparts, towers, but built to resist attack from outside rather than inside. Caesar was building walls to protect his besiegers from the relief army he knew was coming. The engineering was defensive and arrogant in equal measure. We're so confident we can hold this position, we'll announce exactly where we'll be and dare you to remove us. The construction consumed 3 weeks. Every Roman soldier became labourer, hauling timber and digging trenches until hands bled through calluses. Officers supervised with vinewood staffs, beating anyone who slacked. The work was brutal, endless, and precisely calculated. Each trench at exact depth, each rampart at regulation height, each tower positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire. Roman military engineering wasn't artistic. It was mathematical certainty converted into dirt and wood. The Gallic relief army assembled through July and August as tribal levies converged on Alesia from every corner of Gaul. The Aedui contributed 35,000 warriors, the Arverni another 35,000. The Sequani, Senones, Bituriges, and dozens of smaller tribes added thousands each. Vercingetorix's escaped cavalry became recruiting officers, travelling between tribes with message that combined desperation and inspiration. Every warrior in Gaul was marching to Alesia. Miss this battle, and you miss Gaul's only chance to defeat Rome forever. The relief force that eventually marched toward Alesia numbered approximately 250,000 warriors, the largest army Gaul had ever assembled. 8,000 cavalry, the rest infantry, representing virtually every tribe between the Rhine and the Atlantic. They moved slowly because coordinating that mass required constant communication and compromise. Supply trains stretched for miles. Tribal contingents maintained separate identities and leaderships. It wasn't an army in the Roman sense, it was a nation in arms, migrating toward battle. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix rationed food to make supplies last until relief arrived. The 80,000 warriors went on half rations, then quarter rations. Civilians who'd sheltered in the fortress, women, children, elderly, became liability. They consumed food without contributing to defence. Vercingetorix ordered them expelled from Alesia. Approximately 20,000 civilians descended from the plateau toward Roman lines, believing they'd be allowed through to safety or slavery. Caesar ordered his soldiers to let no one pass. The civilians gathered in the no man's land between Alesia's walls and Roman fortifications, trapped. They begged Roman sentries for mercy, offered to become slaves, held up children for soldiers to see. The legionaries watched without moving. Their orders were absolute. No one passes, no exceptions. The civilians starved in full view of both armies. Vercingetorix's warriors watched from Alesia's heights as their families died slowly. Romans watched and did nothing. After a week, the screaming stopped. The relief army arrived in late September and camped on hills overlooking Caesar's contravallation. 250,000 warriors, fresh and well supplied, facing Roman fortifications held by 60,000 soldiers who were now surrounded. Caesar's position was insane by any rational analysis. Besieging one army while being besieged by another, outnumbered 4-1 overall, with supply lines that ran through hostile territory. His soldiers understood the mathematics. They built additional internal fortifications and prepared to fight in every direction simultaneously. The first attack came at dawn. The relief army assaulted the contravallation line at multiple points, while Vercingetorix's forces inside Alesia attacked the circumvallation simultaneously. Romans faced coordinated assault from both sides. Defenders on the outer wall fighting relief army, defenders on the inner wall fighting Alesia's garrison, reserves sprinting between walls as crises developed on both fronts. The battle was three-dimensional chaos where control could collapse in seconds. The Gallic relief army reached Roman ramparts in the first assault. Warriors filled trenches with bundled sticks and bodies, creating pathways across water obstacles. They raised ladders against palisades, climbed under covering fire from allied archers. Some sections of Roman wall were overrun briefly. Gallic warriors stood on Roman ramparts stabbing downward at defenders, exactly the position Romans had enjoyed at Avaricum. Then Roman reserves arrived, cohorts in full formation, shields locked, pushing upward with mechanical precision. The Gauls were ejected from the walls in brutal close combat. Vercingetorix's assault from inside Alesia failed more completely. His warriors, weakened by starvation and demoralization, struggled across the elaborate obstacle system Caesar had built. Sharpened stakes hidden in pits broke charges. Trenches stopped momentum. The inner fortification line was specifically designed to resist attack from the Alesia side, the direction Caesar knew assault would come. Gallic warriors attacked with desperate courage and died on defences engineered to kill them efficiently. The first day's fighting ended at nightfall with both attacks repulsed but Roman casualties mounting. Hundreds dead, thousands wounded, reserves depleted. Another coordinated assault might break through. Caesar sent messengers to his Gallic auxiliaries, the Aedui cavalry who'd remained loyal despite their tribe joining the rebellion. He promised them extraordinary bonuses to hold their positions. The riders, motivated by silver and knowing that Roman defeat meant they'd be executed as traitors by their own people, agreed to fight harder. The second major assault came the following dawn from the relief army alone. They'd identified the weakest section of Roman contravallation, a hillside where terrain made construction difficult and walls were necessarily lower. 60,000 warriors concentrated on that single point, a hammer of humanity trying to crack Roman defences through pure mass. The attackers reached the ramparts, began pulling down palisades, opened gaps in Roman lines. Caesar himself led the counterattack with 4 cohorts of reserves, his personal bodyguard units, the best soldiers in his army. They hit the breakthrough point from the side, catching Gallic warriors focused on the wall from an unexpected angle. The fighting was hand-to-hand butchery where no tactics mattered beyond individual combat multiplied by thousands. Romans held through discipline and desperation. If this wall fell, the entire siege collapsed and they'd be slaughtered between 2 Gallic armies. The Gallic assault broke after 4 hours when Roman reinforcements arrived from sectors not under attack. Caesar had weakened defences elsewhere, gambling that relief army couldn't coordinate simultaneous attacks on multiple fronts. The gamble paid off. The concentrated Gallic assault, unsupported by attacks elsewhere, exhausted itself against the single strengthened point. The attackers withdrew, leaving thousands of bodies carpeting the hillside. The third and final assault came the next day with refined strategy. The relief army attacked the same weak point but sent 60,000 additional warriors circling around Roman positions to assault from the opposite side simultaneously. The northern Roman defences, least developed because terrain there was considered impassable, suddenly faced massive attack. The Gauls had found the actual weak point, not the fortifications Caesar had deliberately made slightly weaker, but the positions he'd assumed wouldn't be attacked, because the approach was too difficult. The northern sector began collapsing within the first hour. Gallic warriors, having made impossible climb to reach Roman positions, fought with fury of men who'd overcome barriers their enemies thought absolute. They knew this was the breakthrough moment. Roman reserves were committed elsewhere fighting the diversionary attack. The northern wall was held by understrength cohorts. For the first time in the siege, Romans faced tactical situation they couldn't solve through discipline and engineering. Caesar committed his cavalry, the Germanic mercenaries who'd destroyed Gallic riders weeks earlier. He sent them outside the fortifications entirely, circling around to hit the relief army's assault from the rear. The move was desperate gamble. If the cavalry failed, they'd be cut off and destroyed. If they succeeded, they might collapse the Gallic attack through chaos. The Germanic cavalry hit the Gallic rear like avalanche of flesh and metal. Warriors focused on storming Roman walls suddenly had enemy cavalry among them, horses trampling infantry, riders stabbing downward with spears. The Gallic formation, compressed between Roman defences ahead and cavalry behind, lost cohesion. Individual warriors fought bravely, but the organisational structure disintegrated. Panic infected the rear ranks and spread forward faster than cavalry could actually advance. The relief army broke, not through Roman victory but through psychological collapse. Warriors who'd been advancing suddenly fled. Those still fighting on the ramparts found themselves unsupported and isolated. The entire 250,000-man army fragmented into tens of thousands of individuals running for survival. Caesar's cavalry pursued, killing until exhaustion or darkness ended the chase. The slaughter extended for miles across the countryside surrounding Alesia. Vercingetorix watched from Alesia's heights as the relief army disintegrated. He understood immediately that no second relief force would come. This had been all of Gaul united, and it had failed. His 80,000 warriors were starving, weakened, and facing Roman army that had just proven it could defeat forces 4 times its size. Continuing resistance meant watching his men die slowly from hunger. Surrender meant his personal death but might save the warriors who'd followed him. He rode down from Alesia alone the next morning, full armour, weapons, best horse, presenting himself as warrior, not supplicant. Caesar received him in front of the assembled legions, theatre designed to demonstrate Roman dominance. Vercingetorix dismounted, laid down his sword and shield at Caesar's feet, and said nothing. The surrender required no words. Both men understood the terms. The warriors would live. Vercingetorix would die, eventually after being displayed in Caesar's triumph as proof that Rome defeated the last great Gallic resistance. Vercingetorix disappeared into a Roman cell and didn't emerge for 6 years. Caesar kept him alive specifically for the triumph celebration. The ultimate propaganda required living proof of conquest. The Gallic war leader was transported to Rome in chains, held in the Tullianum prison beneath the Forum, and fed just enough to survive. His execution, when it finally came in 46 BC, was ritual strangulation, after being paraded through Rome's streets while crowds cheered. The man who'd unified Gaul died in darkness, serving as decoration for Caesar's political theatre. The 80,000 warriors who surrendered at Alesia were distributed as slaves among Caesar's legions. Each soldier received one Gallic prisoner as personal property to sell or keep as servant. The distribution was methodical. Officers recorded names, tribes, ages, creating inventory of human beings like warehouse stock. The warriors who'd nearly defeated Rome became commodities divided among their conquerors, based on service length and rank. A centurion might receive 10 slaves. A common legionary got 1 or 2. The economics of conquest had clear formulas. Gaul didn't surrender after Alesia. Individual tribes and regional coalitions continued fighting through 51 BC in scattered rebellions that Caesar crushed systematically. The resistance wasn't coordinated. Vercingetorix had been the unifying force, and his capture left only local grievances and desperate defiance. Each rebellion made tactical sense from tribal perspective, but strategic stupidity because tribes fought alone against the full weight of Roman military power. The Bellovaci rose first in early 51 BC. They'd contributed forces to Alesia's relief army and returned home expecting honour. Instead, they found Roman tax collectors demanding grain requisitions that would cause starvation. The tribe mobilized 60,000 warriors under King Choreus, fortified their territories, and prepared for siege warfare using tactics learned from watching Romans. They dug trenches, built ramparts, created supply depots. Everything they'd seen Romans do, they attempted to replicate. Caesar arrived with 4 legions and immediately identified the Bellovaci's fundamental error. They'd learned Roman tactics, but not Roman strategic thinking. Their fortifications were positioned to protect tribal territory, not to project power or secure supply lines. Caesar bypassed their main defences entirely, marched into undefended Bellovaci farmlands, and began systematically burning crops. The harvest was weeks from ready. He destroyed it in the fields. Choreus faced starvation or battle. He chose battle, leading his warriors out of fortifications to stop Roman destruction of his people's food supply. The engagement that followed was brief and one-sided. 60,000 Bellovaci warriors, however brave, couldn't defeat 4 veteran legions in open combat. The tribal formation lasted maybe 2 hours before collapsing. Choreus died fighting, refusing to run. His body was found surrounded by dead Romans, individual heroism that changed nothing about the outcome. The Bellovaci survivors surrendered within days. Caesar imposed terms that were calculated humiliation. Hostages including all tribal nobles' children, complete disarmament, grain tribute that exceeded what Roman requisitions had originally demanded, an acknowledgement that the tribe existed only through Roman mercy. The tribal council accepted everything. Their alternative was extermination. The Carnutes tribe, who'd initiated the Great Rebellion by massacring Roman merchants, faced particular retribution. Caesar marched 8 legions into their territory in spring 51 BC and announced that Carnutes' lands were now Roman property. Every person in tribal territory, warrior, farmer, woman, child, was considered rebel subject to execution or enslavement. The only path to survival was unconditional surrender to Roman authority and acceptance of whatever punishment Caesar deemed appropriate. The Carnutes tried guerrilla warfare. Warriors melted into forests, attacked Roman foraging parties, assassinated collaborators. The strategy worked briefly, inflicting casualties and disrupting supply lines. Then Caesar stopped chasing the warriors and started burning villages. If you want to hide in forests, he reasoned, you need villages to return to for food and shelter. Destroy the villages and the forests become prisons rather than refuges. The systematic destruction took 3 months. Every Carnute settlement burned, every grain store destroyed, every well poisoned or filled with dirt. Livestock was slaughtered, not for food but to deny resources. Orchards were cut down, vineyards pulled up, even vegetable gardens salted. The Romans were erasing the economic infrastructure that allowed human habitation. By summer, Carnute's territory was moonscape where nothing grew and nothing lived. The Carnute's warriors emerged from forest to find their families starving in refugee camps. They surrendered not because Romans defeated them militarily, but because continuing to fight meant watching their children die from hunger. Caesar's punishment was specific. The tribal leadership was executed publicly, the population was enslaved and sold, and Carnute's lands were given to tribes that had remained loyal to Rome. The tribe's name survived in Roman records, but their political existence ended. Ambiorix remained free. The Eburones' king, who'd destroyed the 14th Legion years earlier, had evaded every Roman attempt at capture. He lived in forests and marshes, moving constantly, protected by a network of loyalists who'd rather die than betray him. Caesar offered enormous bounties for information leading to his capture. The rewards exceeded what a common soldier might earn in a lifetime. No one collected. The Eburones' territory had been declared open to settlement by any neighbouring tribes. Germanic peoples from across the Rhine crossed over and began farming land where Eburones' villages had stood. These settlers brought families, livestock, and permanent structures. They weren't raiders. They were colonists replacing a population Rome had exterminated. The Eburones' survivors, scattered through refugee camps and slave markets, watched Germanic families living in their former homes. Ambiorix sent messages to other Gallic tribes urging continued resistance. His letters described Roman occupation's reality: economic exploitation, cultural destruction, loss of freedom measured in daily indignities. The messages resonated emotionally but failed strategically. No tribe was willing to face extermination for inspiring rhetoric from a fugitive king. Ambiorix represented Gallic defiance, but also its futility. He'd survived by abandoning his people. The heroism was ambiguous. The final major rebellion came from Uxellodunum, a fortress town in southern Gaul held by remnants of various defeated tribes. 2,000 warriors and civilian supporters occupied hilltop position that Caesar's lieutenants had failed to capture. The defenders had food for months, good water supply from spring inside the fortress, and determination born from knowing surrender meant slavery. They'd watched other tribes submit and still be destroyed. Fighting to the death at least preserved dignity. Caesar arrived personally and identified the fortress's weakness immediately. The water supply came from a spring at the hill's base, accessible from inside the walls through covered passage. Cut off the water, and the fortress became death trap. His engineers diverted the spring by digging channels that redirected flow away from Uxellodunum. The work required weeks but was technically straightforward. Move enough dirt and water follows gravity elsewhere. The defenders inside Uxellodunum watched their spring slow to trickle, then stop completely. They dug frantically trying to reach the water table, going deeper each day as desperation increased. by the time they understood the spring wasn't coming back, they'd weakened from thirst to the point where fighting was impossible. The surrender came without battle. The gates opened and warriors too dehydrated to stand walked out with hands raised. Caesar ordered every adult male defender to have his hands cut off, not killed, mutilated and released. The amputations were performed systematically over several days. Roman soldiers held men down while camp doctors sawed through wrists. The victims were bandaged to prevent death from bleeding, then released to wander Gaul as living warnings. 2,000 men with stumps where hands had been, begging for food they couldn't hold, completely dependent on others' mercy. The punishment was designed to be visible and permanent. Every Gaul who saw them would understand what resisting Rome cost. The mutilated survivors scattered across Gaul, carrying news that pacification was complete. There would be no more rebellions, no more resistance, no more hope. Submit or die, and even submission might not save you if Rome decided to make examples. The psychological impact exceeded any military victory. Gallic tribes had fought each other for generations. They understood losing battles and accepting defeat. They didn't understand systematic cruelty designed to destroy will to resist. Roman infrastructure spread across Gaul like infection through bloodstream. Roads connected tribal territories using engineering that ignored natural obstacles. Surveyors marked routes straight as geometry would allow. Then construction crews built raised roadbeds that remained passable regardless of weather. The roads weren't for Gallic benefit. They existed to move Roman legions quickly between potential trouble spots and facilitate tax collection. Latin displaced Gaulish among tribal elites because conducting business with Roman authorities required speaking their language. Gallic nobles sent sons to Roman schools in the province, where they learned literature, rhetoric, and imperial values. These educated young men returned home speaking Latin better than their native tongue, wearing togas, quoting Cicero. Their fathers had fought Romans with spears. They fought Roman taxes with lawyers. Roman currency replaced tribal exchange systems. Silver denarii became standard payment for goods and services because Roman tax collectors only accepted Roman coins. Gallic farmers who'd never seen coined money suddenly needed it to pay requisitions. They borrowed from Roman moneylenders at interest rates that created permanent debt. Within a generation, much of Gaul's land was owned by Roman investors who'd acquired property through debt foreclosure. Temples to Jupiter and Mars appeared in tribal settlements where Druids had performed sacrifices. The Romans didn't forbid Celtic religious practices. They tolerated them while building more impressive temples to Roman gods. Competition through architecture. Gallic tribesmen continued worshipping their traditional deities, but increasingly also made offerings at Roman temples because Roman gods were winning gods. Within 2 generations, the old practices would survive only as rural superstitions, while cities worshipped Roman pantheon. The Druid priesthood faced systematic destruction because it represented organized resistance to Romanization. Druids served as judges, teachers, keepers of oral tradition, and coordinators of intertribal communication. They were educated class that maintained Celtic cultural identity across political boundaries. Romans recognized them as threat and banned human sacrifice, the core Druidic practice, then expanded the ban to cover Druidic teaching, assemblies, and eventually existence. The Druids didn't disappear immediately, but their institutional structure crumbled under Roman legal pressure. Caesar returned to Cisalpine Gaul in winter 50 BC, declaring the conquest complete. His dispatches to Rome claimed total victory. 8 years of campaigning, 1 million enemy dead, 1 million enslaved, 800 cities conquered, 300 tribes subdued. The numbers were probably accurate. The Gallic Wars represented industrial-scale warfare applied to tribal societies. Romans had discovered that systematic approach to conquest, engineering, logistics, discipline, could overcome any numerical disadvantage. The financial accounting was equally impressive. Caesar had entered Gaul owing approximately 300 million denarii to various creditors. He emerged from Gaul wealthy enough to pay those debts, bribe senators, fund private armies, and still have surplus. The wealth came from plunder, tribute, and slave sales. A successful campaign generated enough revenue to finance the next campaign. The system was a self-sustaining genocide machine that paid dividends. The Roman Senate voted Thanksgiving celebrations after receiving Caesar's final reports. 20 days of public festivals, unprecedented duration for military victory. Senators who'd criticized Caesar's unauthorized conquest found themselves isolated. How could they oppose a general who'd expanded Roman territory by 50% and generated massive revenue without costing the treasury anything? Caesar's success made his methods unquestionable. The political consequences emerged slowly. Caesar had created an army loyal to him personally rather than to Roman state. 10 legions of veterans who'd become rich through Gallic plunder viewed Caesar as patron and benefactor. They'd followed him through 8 years of constant campaigning, had survived battles that killed comrades, had received bonuses exceeding their wildest expectations. Those soldiers would follow Caesar against anyone, including Rome itself if ordered. The Senate recognized this danger too late. They demanded Caesar disband his legions and return to Rome as private citizen before taking up magistracy. Caesar refused. He crossed the Rubicon River in 49 BC with 1 legion, initiating civil war that would destroy the Republic. The Gallic Wars had been practiced for this final campaign. Everything Caesar learned about command, logistics, and ruthless efficiency would now be applied to conquering Rome. Gaul watched the Roman Civil War from the perspective of newly conquered province. The tribal leaders understood that Romans were killing each other over political power Caesar had gained by killing Gauls. The irony was obvious and bitter. Gallic gold financed both sides of the civil war. Gallic slaves worked Roman estates while owners fought over who'd control the empire. The conquest had been completed so thoroughly that even Roman internal conflicts used Gallic resources. Vercingetorix died in 46 BC, strangled after Caesar's triumph parade. His body was thrown into the Tiber. His name survived in histories written by the people who'd killed him. Caesar's own account of the Gallic Wars, Commentari de Bello Gallico, presented the conquest as civilizing mission bringing Roman order to barbarian chaos. Future generations would read Caesar's version and accept his framing. The Gallic perspective died with the tribes who'd been exterminated. Gaul transformed into Roman province so completely that within a century, most inhabitants considered themselves Roman rather than Gallic. The tribal identities that had defined pre-conquest society became historical curiosities. The Gallic language survived in rural areas, but cities spoke Latin exclusively. Celtic artistic traditions merged with Roman styles, creating hybrid culture that resembled neither ancestor. The integration was called successful Romanization. From Gallic perspective, it was cultural death. The long-term consequences exceeded anyone's imagination. Gaul became Rome's richest province, producing grain that fed Italian cities and recruiting soldiers for legions that conquered the rest of Europe. The roads Caesar built remained primary transportation infrastructure for 2,000 years. The Latin imposed on Gallic speakers evolved into French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and Romanian, languages spoken by hundreds of millions. Celtic tongue survived only in isolated regions that Roman power never fully penetrated. The mathematical precision was darkly perfect. 1 million dead, 1 million enslaved, from estimated pre-war population of 10 million. 10% killed, 10% enslaved, remainder transformed into Roman subjects who raised children speaking Latin and worshipping Roman gods. 3 generations after the conquest, finding someone who remembered independent Gaul became impossible. The conquest hadn't just defeated enemies, it had erased the possibility of resistance by destroying the culture that might have rebelled. Caesar got stabbed to death by senators on the Ides of March, 44 BC. He'd conquered Gaul, won the civil war, made himself dictator for life, and died from 23 knife wounds in the theatre of Pompey. The senators who killed him thought they were saving the Republic. They were 4 years too late. The Republic had died in Gallic forests and siege camps and battlefields, where Caesar learned that Roman military power combined with personal command loyalty could overcome any opposition. Gaul remained Roman for 500 years, longer than America has existed, longer than most modern nations have continuity. The conquest was so successful that when Germanic tribes finally invaded in the 5th century AD, they found a thoroughly Romanized province that had forgotten it was ever anything else. The Franks who eventually conquered Gaul adopted Latin, Roman law, and Christian religion that Romans had spread. They called themselves French, etymology connecting to Germanic Franks rather than Celtic Gauls. The final accounting revealed conquest's true horror. It wasn't the battles that destroyed Gaul, it was the systematic elimination of everything that made Gallic identity possible. Language replaced, religion suppressed, economic independence destroyed through debt and taxation, political autonomy eliminated. They couldn't survive having their children educated in conquerors' language, worshipping conquerors' gods, obeying conquerors' laws. By the time Gallic parents realized their children were becoming Romans, the transformation was irreversible. Cultural death through compounding small surrenders, each one seeming reasonable at the time. History remembered Julius Caesar as military genius and political innovator. His conquests demonstrated Roman superiority and spread civilization. This narrative survived because Romans wrote the histories and Roman cultural inheritors preserved them. The Gallic perspective, that Caesar was genocidal war criminal who destroyed entire civilization to pay his gambling debts, disappeared along with the people who would have told it. Winners write history, losers get chapters describing their defeat. Gaul's transformation from independent Celtic civilization to Roman province, then to post-Roman France, represented the most successful conquest in ancient history. Not because Romans killed the most people, other campaigns had higher body counts. Because Romans convinced the conquered that being conquered improved them. Gallic nobles learned to see themselves as provincial Romans receiving civilization's gift, rather than victims of cultural genocide. The psychological conquest outlasted the military one by millennia. The roads built during pacification still carry traffic. The cities founded as military camps are now capitals. The language imposed on conquered peoples evolved into tongues spoken across continents. The legal systems developed to govern provinces became foundation for Western law. The conquest's infrastructure outlived the empire that created it, which might be the darkest success of all. Rome destroyed Gaul so completely that modern civilization built itself on the ruins without recognizing what had been lost.